Good evening and happy Veterans Day. Thank you so much for joining us for this evening's program. I'd like to ask you to please rise, and gentlemen, remove your covers. Veterans, you may remain covered and render a hand salute as the national anthem is performed by members of the Governor's own 126th Army Band. Please help me and thank the members of the 126th Army Band for their performance and their service to our state and nation. I'd like to share a special message received from the Governor of the State of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer. Dear friends, I'd like to extend my warmest greetings to everyone attending this Veterans Day celebration hosted by the Hauenstein Center, Grand Valley State University's Office of the President, and the Grand Valley State University's Peter Secchia Military and Veteran Resource Center as they welcome Vice Admiral Sandra Stosz. I would like to take this time to recognize all the work that these groups have done at the local, state, and national levels to honor and celebrate all our American veterans. I am truly thankful for your hard work as you celebrate the tremendous sacrifices that our veterans have made for our state and national security. May this event provide you all the space to honor those who have laid their lives down for our country. I look forward to seeing all the positive memories that come forth during this event. Again, I would like to offer my sincere gratitude to the Hauenstein Center, Grand Valley State University's Office of the President, and the Grand Valley State University's Peter Secchia Military and Veteran Resource Center. Please accept my best wishes for an enjoyable and memorable convention, and may you continue to have success in every endeavor. Sincerely, Gretchen Whitmer, Governor of Michigan. Veterans Day is truly a special day. Although not officially known as Veterans Day until 1954, November 11th was originally established as Armistice Day in 1919 to honor the end of World War I. The historical significance of the date, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, provides an extraordinary backdrop to honor and celebrate all American veterans. As a veteran myself, I am extremely proud to belong to an organization that is dedicating the time and resources to support veteran students. I would be remiss not to recognize the efforts that Grand Valley's President Philomena Mantella and the Peter Secchia Military and Veteran Resource Center have made to make our campus veteran inclusive. Because of their work and generous support of our donors, our campus is elevating the leadership experiences of those who have served, so they will enter into the workforce able to make the greatest impact possible. I would like to recognize some special guests tonight. President Emeritus Tom Haas, members of the Hauenstein Center Advisory Cabinet, Hauenstein family member Brian, and of course our veterans and those actively serving our great nation in uniform. I would like, if you can, to ask all veterans to please stand. Thank you. Thank you. Tonight's event will start with a presentation by our featured speaker, who will then be joined on stage by Jill Hinton-Wolf. for a short, moderated conversation followed by audience Q&A. Jill, an Army veteran, serves as the director of the Peter Secchia Military and Veterans Resource Center here at Grand Valley. Hauenstein Center staff will be in the aisles with microphones for the question and answer portion of the evening. I now have the honor of introducing tonight's speaker, Vice Admiral Sandra Stosz. Admiral Stosz started out in the U.S. Coast Guard as an ensign serving aboard polar icebreakers, conducting national security missions from the Arctic to the Antarctic. Her 40-year career was filled with leadership lessons gleaned while breaking ice and breaking glass as the first woman to command an icebreaker on the Great Lakes and to lead a U.S. Armed Forces Service Academy. Along the way, Sandy served for 12 years at sea, commanding 2 ships, and led large Coast Guard organizations during times of crisis and complexity. She finished her career as the first woman assigned as Deputy Commandant for Mission Support, directing one of the Coast Guard's largest enterprises. She has lectured widely on leadership and has been featured on C-SPAN and other media outlets. In 2012, Newsweek's The Daily Beast named Sandy to their list of 150 women who shake the world. She volunteers in leadership roles for several organizations and runs Sandra Stosz, LLC. Sandy enjoys hiking, swimming, birdwatching, beachcombing, and spending time with her family. Please help me in welcoming Vice Admiral Sandy Stosz to our stage.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for that warm welcome. It's truly an honor to be with you here in this beautiful auditorium to help recognize our veterans and celebrate their contribution to this community and to our great nation. And on behalf of all veterans, I'm grateful to President Mantella, Director Holmes of the Hauenstein Center for Presidential Studies, and Director Wolf of the Peter Secchia Military and Veterans Resource Center for making Grand Valley State University an inclusive place for veterans. I love that. I've heard that today and just think it's great. And I know there are a lot of veterans in our audience tonight. I've had the pleasure to meet a few, but I always like to ask for a show of hands from the different services so we can all appreciate who's here. So how about the Army? Who's here from the Army? A couple? All right, this looks like a big number there. How about the Air Force? Just 1 or 2 or 3. How about Space Force? Anybody? Man, we need to grow the ranks of that Space Force. And Marines. I know there's some Marines. Happy birthday, Marines. My hotel was filled with Marines. They must be doing something. I don't know what they're doing in there. Having a party, maybe. And how about the Navy? Navy, all right. Some fellow Sea Service. And the National Guard. National Guard? They played for us. Thanks to them. Of course, I'm saving the best for last. The Coast Guard. Semper Paratus. I know we've got a few in the audience. All right. Let's give a round of applause to all of our veterans. And November is Military Family Appreciation Month. And we couldn't do our jobs without our families. So let's give a round of applause for military families. Members of the U.S. Armed Forces are bound together in service to our great nation by the oath we take to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and by our power, by the oath and by our shared mission to defend our homeland against all threats. In testimony to the power of our democracy and the character of our people, we serve as a volunteer force. And the bond we veterans share confirms that none of us succeeds alone. It's all about the power of the team. We learn and grow together as individuals and as services. And it's about following in the footsteps of and living up to the standards set by those who have gone before us. Each service has rich traditions and revered history. We celebrate our victory and we honor our heroes. In the Coast Guard, we're each proud to be part of a long blue line of Coast Guard men and women who have paved the way for the past 232 years for the rest of us to follow. At the Coast Guard Academy, for instance, each incoming class of cadets is paired through our Link in the Chain program with a class that entered 50 years before them. Recently, I had the opportunity while visiting the Academy to observe those quality interactions with one side sharing wisdom and insights and the other side sharing energy and enthusiasm. And I'm sure you can guess who was who. Those connections across the generations are what keep us strong and relevant and they're more important today than ever before. And I'm glad to see here in this room we have the Cook Leadership Scholars, and we have some of the members and others from the community of a different generation. So I've been on both ends of that long blue line, rising up through the ranks from enthusiastic cadet to experienced admiral. But like every veteran, my success was due in great part to the strength of other veterans, links in that long blue chain. I succeeded by standing on the shoulders of those who came before me and being supported there by those serving under me and with me. And the women on whose shoulders I stood are those who boldly paved the way by signing up to serve in the Women's Reserve during World War II. They performed duties on the home front, from administrative to operational, while the men shipped off to war. And let's remember now, take a moment to remember those women veterans by recalling the names of the Women's Reserve for each of the armed forces. So having been in education, I kind of like to do a little quizzing of the audience when I'm giving a talk. So how about the Navy? Does anyone know what the Navy's Women's Reserve were called? And of course, WAVES, Women Available for Emergency Service, WAVES. How about the Air Force? Somebody. Okay, it's WASPs, right? Women Air Force Service Pilots. These are women who would, the men, sure, they flew these planes, these fighter planes in combat, but the women flew them before they were tested. They test piloted them and had to deliver them to where they shipped out to where the men would fly them in combat. That's no small task. I really, really admire the WASPs. And how about the Army? Anyone know the Army name? WAC. Okay, Women's Army Corps. And how about the Marines? Maybe the least imaginative, U.S. Women's Marine Corps Reserve. And of course, I'm saving again the best for last. The Coast Guard was the SPAR, Semper Paratus, always ready. So I'm particularly inspired by two remarkable Coast Guard SPARs, Captain Dorothy Stratton and Yeoman Second Class Olivia Hooker. In tribute, I dedicated my book, Breaking Ice and Breaking Glass, Leading in Uncharted Waters, to these two incredible women. And Captain Dorothy Stratton started out in the Navy as a WAVE, and noticing the Coast Guard didn't have a women's reserve, she advocated for one. She helped establish it and transferred to the Coast Guard to become the first director of the SPARs. In addition to her accomplished military service, she was awarded her PhD in education from Columbia University and served as the first full-time dean of women at Purdue. She served as executive director of the Girl Scouts of America. And after a lifetime of service, she died in 2006 at age 107. And in her memory, the Coast Guard named its third 418-foot national security cutter, the Stratton. Yeoman Second Class Olivia Hooker was the first African-American woman to serve as a SPAR. And in addition to her military service, she earned her PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Rochester and taught as a clinical professor at Fordham University. After a lifetime of service, she died in 2018 at age 103. There's something about those Coast Guard women. In her memory, the Coast Guard named one of its 154-foot fast response cutters the Olivia Hooker. So I hope that I'm following in the footsteps of the longevity of these women on whose shoulders I stand. And both those women were trailblazers in the purest sense of the word. I mean, some people call me trailblazers, but look, these women were during World War II. And they dedicated themselves to serving our nation and humanity, not only as SPARs, but by continuing as educators and public servants throughout their exceptionally long, impactful lives. Dorothy Stratton served as a role model to me since the year 2000, when I was stationed in a challenging leadership position at Coast Guard headquarters. And as I tell this short story, keep in mind there were few, if any, women senior to me to serve as role models in the workplace in those days. So one day, a female coworker pulled out a framed poster-sized photo of Dorothy Stratton that had been stuffed away in a closet for years. And she gathered us around to display her treasured find and to recount Captain Stratton's story. And I kind of had heard it, but not really appreciated it. So as I listened, it struck me, wow, here I am in today's Coast Guard, serving on the pointy end of the spear as a cutterman. That's like a surface warfare officer in the Navy. Because Captain Dorothy Stratton paved the way. She made it possible for me to have opportunities she never herself enjoyed. And from that moment of recognition, she became my role model And that poster went right up on the wall immediately. And the Coast Guard has come a long way since the women entered the reserves during World War II. Even though there's still work to be done, I think we're making great progress, and I'm really proud of how well the armed forces have integrated women and given them opportunities to achieve their full potential. And let's profile a mid-grade Coast Guard woman as an example. Her name is Lieutenant Commander Maggie Champlin, and she's this year's recipient of the Captain Dorothy Stratton Women's Leadership Award. And just as I stood on Captain Stratton's shoulders, I hope my shoulders have served as a platform for young women like Lieutenant Commander Champlin. Lieutenant Commander Champlin is a pilot stationed at the Coast Guard Helicopter Interdiction Tactical Squadron in Jacksonville, Florida. HITRON, as we call it, is an armed unit specializing in airborne use of force and drug interdiction. Lieutenant Commander Champlin and her crew deploy from the flight deck of Coast Guard cutters to stop go-fast smuggling vessels. They use warning shots or they shoot out the smugglers' engines when necessary to compel compliance. And that's exciting and challenging work at the pointy end of the spear. Like Captain Dorothy Stratton, Lieutenant Commander Champlin began her military career in the U.S. Navy. She's a graduate of the Naval Academy and a former MH-60 Seahawk helicopter pilot. She's a qualified flight examiner and instructor pilot. And she found her way into the Coast Guard through the Direct Commission Program. She was recognized with the prestigious Dorothy Stratton Award for her leadership at her previous unit, the Coast Guard Air Station in North Bend, Oregon. Her commanding officer noted, quote, "It is her sincere desire to care for those around her in both their personal and professional lives. That makes her a standout candidate for this prestigious award," unquote. Air Station North Bend is located in one of the Coast Guard's most challenging and dangerous operating areas. The Coast Guard only assigns its very best pilots there. It's surrounded by treacherous cliffs rising high above the pounding surf and characterized by low visibility and extremely bad weather. Many of the station's search and rescue cases are performed in the coastal mountains or cliffs where hikers get stranded, so the Coast Guard has a whole inland search and rescue mission there. As safety officer at the air station, Lieutenant Commander Champlin created new high-risk scenario training to give flight crews the best chance of saving lives during the most grueling conditions. She built a program designed to train pilots and air crews for the dangerous nighttime, inland and vertical surface environments. And when asked about leadership, Lieutenant Commander Champlin offers powerful advice. She recommends making it a habit to get out from behind the desk and talk to people. Ask them what they need. Honestly listen to what they have to say. She credits that practice with her ability to build connections and trust. And I agree, succeeding as a leader is all about building trust. And I love that Lieutenant Commander Champlin talks about the power of building trust. To me, that means not only building trust with others, but first learning to trust and believe in yourself. And sometimes that's hard to do. It was for me. We've talked about the Coast Guard and the long blue line of men and women who have served. I've introduced members of that long blue line on whose shoulders I stood, Captain Stratton and YN2 Hooker, and I've showcased a current day aviator, Lieutenant Commander Champlin. Now I'll tell you a little bit about my career journey from cadet to admiral and how the Coast Guard helped me learn to believe in myself and become a better leader. So I always start my story with core values instilled during childhood. That's because core values are the pillars of one's character, and your character defines you as a person and as a leader. My personal core values are honesty and humility, hard work and perseverance. And over time, those values shaped me as a leader of character. My parents, coaches, and teachers taught me the core values of honesty and humility. I was the eldest of 4 children and the only girl. I was a tomboy and competed in sports and other activities with my brothers and their friends. My parents treated us kids all the same. They didn't treat me different because I was a girl, and they set high expectations for our behavior and conduct. And I learned to adjust and adapt to fit in, to resolve conflicts on the playground of life instead of taking offense, and to be forthright with others. And playing with the other kids and living up to the standards set by my parents, coaches, and teachers helped me discover the value of both being honest and humble. I internalized the core values of hard work and perseverance, laboring on farms at a young age. And I'm sure there's some people who farmed in this audience tonight. And when I was a teenager, our country was going through the oil shock of the mid-1970s. I'm sure some of you remember the gas lines and the rampant inflation that eclipsed what we're going through today. And I knew I needed a job to make money for college, but there were few available in the suburbs where we lived in Ellicott City, Maryland. So I spent summers with my grandparents in the Connecticut River Valley in Amherst, Massachusetts. And there I labored on a tobacco farm, tying and sewing tobacco. And in the stifling heat under those tobacco tents and in the barns, working side by side with migrants and juvenile delinquents and other local kids, I had to scramble to make the daily quota of production required to earn my pay and keep my job. And talk about hard work. It would have been really easy to quit, but instead I persevered and worked even harder to earn something called piecework, and that was incentive pay for those who exceeded the minimal quota. And I used that money made on piecework to buy myself ice cream. And anyone who knows me knows that I love ice cream. And that reward taught me the value of going beyond expectations and doing more than just the minimum that's required in life. And those foundational values of hard work, perseverance, honesty, and humility that were instilled in childhood helped me well throughout my entire career and in my entire life. It went both ways. And by the time I entered high school in 1974, Title IX, the law providing equal access in education for women and girls, had been in place for 2 years, so I could participate in varsity sports. And testing myself on the playing field where I found success as an athlete helped me build much-needed confidence. I was really an unconfident young girl, even with all those brothers. Everyone's got a different personality. And when I was a junior in high school in 1976, the nation's 5 service academies, the Army, the Air Force, Merchant Marine, Navy, and Coast Guard, they were required to open their doors to women, and they had been for men only until then. And my local newspaper, the Baltimore Sun, ran a feature article on the Naval Academy, nearby in Annapolis, Maryland, right around the corner. And I read with fascination about the opportunity to go to sea, travel the world, serve a purpose bigger than myself, and to get a free education. And that was a big deal in the 70s. That's why I was working those jobs when I was only 13, 14 years old up on the farm. So I decided then and there, the Naval Academy was the college for me. My guidance counselor sagely advised, however, Sandy, you need to cast a wider net. You can't just apply to one college. Take a look at this flyer I got from this place called the Coast Guard Academy in New London, Connecticut. And we pored over that flyer, and between the two of us, we decided the Coast Guard was a small Navy, so I should apply. And of course, the Coast Guard is nothing like the Navy. We're both sea services, but that's about where it ends. And the Coast Guard becomes part of the Navy in times of war, and the Coast Guard has served in every war and conflict this nation has ever been involved in. In fact, the Coast Guard's only Medal of Honor recipient, Signalman First Class Douglas Monroe, was coxswain of a landing craft and was killed while covering Marines who were evacuating off of Guadalcanal during World War II. The Coast Guard has a broad set of peacetime missions. Around 50,000 active duty, reserve, and civilian members operate and support hundreds of rotor and fixed-wing aircraft, small boats, and cutters that perform 11 exciting missions. And those include the search and rescue that you all know about, disaster response, waterway safety, port security, law enforcement, polar ice breaking, of course, environmental protection, homeland security, and more. And more all the time, too. Coast Guard is the go-to agency. And did you know the Coast Guard doesn't just serve here at home? We serve overseas, too. Those brand new 418-foot national security cutters patrol the South China Sea, providing the soft power that can maintain a presence less threatening than the U.S. Navy. And we have 6 new 154-foot fast response patrol boats that provide security in the Persian Gulf, where the Navy's 5th Fleet operates. We have big polar security cutters that support U.S. scientific research missions in the Arctic and the Antarctic, and that maintain a U.S. presence in those contested waters. So those overseas missions keep America safe and secure by projecting U.S. interests and power abroad and keeping threats, therefore, away from our borders. So we don't ever have to do the homeland security, hopefully, if we're doing a good enough job keeping the threats away from our borders. So with this newfound knowledge about the Coast Guard, I applied to both the Naval Academy and the Coast Guard Academy. And I heard back from the Coast Guard Academy right away. And that's because the Coast Guard Academy admissions process is based on merit, whereas the Naval Academy's a political appointment process requiring a congressional nomination. And I chose the Coast Guard Academy because I wanted to go somewhere where they valued me for what I knew, not who I knew. That was just who I was. And although I didn't realize it at the time, the Coast Guard had also opened every operational specialty to women. We hadn't put any exclusion laws or rules in place, and women could serve on all the Coast Guard's large armed ships, the size of a Navy frigate. And unfortunately, the Navy and the other armed forces were precluded from allowing women to serve on the front lines by those combat exclusion laws and policies that weren't removed for decades and until recently in some cases. And so I'm really glad I chose the Coast Guard, which offered me the opportunity to achieve my full potential. But it was hard. And when I entered the Coast Guard Academy in 1978 with a third class to include women, there were only less than 5% women in the core of 1,000 cadets. And we started with 30 women in my class, and 4 years later we graduated, just 10. We were often isolated and alone in that environment, and there were a number of men who just didn't think we belonged, and they would mock us and told us, you guys, you're not real women if you're here. And that's, when you're already not really that confident, that's another blow. But I learned that I could choose not to be offended or demoralized by what others said or did. I couldn't control my environment, none of us can. But I had the power over my own thoughts and emotions. And instead of telling them or letting them get to me, I chose to prove them wrong. And I drew upon my core values, hard work and perseverance, and made it through those 4 years as one of the first women to earn my commission as an officer. And I'm going to share 3 lessons and stories that demonstrate how I navigated uncharted waters to get through the hard times during my 36-year career, and how that journey made me a better leader, and how you can too become a better leader through hard times. And I succeeded by learning to turn adversity into opportunity with the power of confidence, the power of being different, and the power of perseverance. So the first lesson is the power of confidence. And my story takes place in 1982 on board my first ship, the icebreaker Glacier, stationed in Long Beach, California. Upon graduating from the Coast Guard Academy in 1982, I commissioned as an ensign, starting out at the most junior rank, and reported to the Glacier. And within weeks, we deployed on a 5-month trip to support the science research mission at the U.S. base in McMurdo, Antarctica. My job was to qualify as an officer of the deck, and in that position, I was responsible for driving the ship and supervising the watchstanders, the helmsman, the lookout, and others up on the bridge or pilot house. And it was dangerous work navigating through the fields of icebergs and all kinds of weather, including dense fog and blinding snowstorms. So there was a lot to learn before an officer of the deck could earn her qualification. And after a few weeks of standing watches under the instruction of a qualified officer of the deck, I had completed all the basic requirements, but still hadn't earned my qualification. And I asked my boss, what more do I have to do? And he told me there was something missing in my command presence. I pressed for more details, and he hesitated, and then he said with certainty, I'm not going to qualify you until you stand on the bridge, barking orders like John Wayne with a 6-gun in each hand. And for those young people, the Cook Fellows in the audience, you won't know who John Wayne was, but he was like an action hero. So I had to be an action hero, ready to shoot people down or whatever. And I was just floored and didn't know how to respond. And my way of leading wasn't to bark orders. Rather, I relied on my personal power. I told the watchstanders what needed to be done, and they readily complied. And I tried to get my mind around being John Wayne, which was my boss's idea. He was, from an older generation. That's what he envisioned when he thought he saw an officer of the deck who was qualified, was this person barking orders. But I knew that wasn't going to happen. It just wasn't me. And I asked myself, what was missing? I had demonstrated the competence needed to obtain my qualification, so that wasn't the problem. But my shyness and my quiet personality made it seem like I didn't have the confidence needed to stand the watch on my own. So it occurred to me in a flash, I needed to draw upon that inner resilience that had gotten me through to find the courage to project that confidence. Competence without confidence isn't enough, and you need both to succeed. You just can't uncouple them. And with great relief, I realized I don't need to be John Wayne. I don't need to pretend to be and act like somebody else. I didn't need to bark orders after all. I realized I needed to be myself and believe in myself. I was doing a good job. And my quiet personality actually helped me relate well with the people I led. I could build trust and earn respect instead of having to bark orders. With my newfound confidence, it projected, and it wasn't long before my boss noticed a difference and gave me that coveted watch-standing qualification. So discovering that powerful combination of courage and confidence was a major turning point in my young career. It helped me believe in myself and set me on the pathway to success. So the second lesson is the power of being different. And my story takes place in 1985 on board my ship, the cutter Clover, in Eureka, California. After completing my tour of duty on the Icebreaker Glacier in 1983, I continued serving at sea for another 5 years. I was the first and only woman to serve in a crew of 150 men on the polar icebreaker Polar Star in Seattle, Washington. And there I had the amazing opportunity to sail from pole to pole, deploying up north to the Arctic and then again south to Antarctica. It was in 1985 and I was on the Polar Star in Antarctica when I learned by the old-fashioned radio phone patch. Well, we didn't have communications in those days, so you had this ham radio operator that would patch a phone call through. And from my assignment officer is on the phone with me. I think it was like 2 in the morning my time, wank, wank, wank. Your next duty assignment is going to be wank, wank, wank. Operations officer on board the 180-foot cutter Clover in Eureka. And believe me, that was something that came out of the blue. It hadn't been on my list of preferred jobs. And I'm sure everyone in here who is a veteran, who'd been in the armed forces, had gotten their preferred jobs, right? Every time, your number one choice? Well, no, it doesn't work that way. And so Eureka wasn't on my list. I mean, I'd never even heard of Eureka. I mean, who the heck has heard of Eureka? Anyone here heard of Eureka? No, 1 or 2 hands, but still, that's almost nothing. I mean, it's a little tiny town. And one of my shipmates who had been stationed in Eureka, because there was Coast Guard there, he laughed when he heard about my orders and he told me I'd be miserable there because there was nobody in Eureka but lumberjacks and fishermen, which is sort of true. And the Clover had never had women on board either, so I'd be the first and only woman in a crew of about 50 men. So as a 25-year-old young woman, the prospect of moving to a small, remote town with lumberjacks and fishermen to serve on an all-male ship in a leadership position, it did seem somewhat daunting. But I'm stubborn, and people who know me know to never tell me I can't do something. And my stubbornness helped me overcome my trepidation. I made up my mind to prove my shipmate wrong and to prove to myself that I could adapt, adjust, and overcome obstacles, navigating around those icebergs just as I'd done on board the Glacier. And as it turned out, that was easier than I expected, actually. So I'd kind of worked myself up for nothing because as an adventuresome outdoors person, I loved Eureka. I loved those giant redwoods. And I loved my new ship, the Clover. Of course, there were challenges. There always are for everyone who's new to something, not just people in the minority or a woman. It's a good thing I'd spent 3 years on icebreakers up till then because I was the one who had to break the ice and help the men understand. Working with and for a woman was no different than working with and for a man. And this took me a while to figure out that the guys actually thought it would be different. So I would jokingly ask them, don't you guys have wives, sisters, and daughters? Didn't you go to school with girls? And they'd meekly answer, well, yes, ma'am. And that broke the ice. It's like, okay, this is normal. So on the other hand, people would ask me, civilians, friends, and family, isn't it hard being the only woman out there with all those men? As if there was something mysteriously hard about that. And I'd answer, being the only woman is actually a superpower. And remember, I was raised with those 3 brothers, and being the only woman was the norm for me. It was the men who were off balance. And I learned to use the power of being different in a good way. And first, you take the initiative to reach out and break the ice with humor. You don't sit back and wait to be welcomed. And then you review or set the standards so the men know what to expect. So you have a playing field. And then you draw upon that inner courage that we've been working on to project the necessary confidence that will help them believe in you. And you walk around, like Lieutenant Commander Champlin said, and you look, you listen, and you learn from your people. And I call this the 4 L's of leadership. Look, listen, learn, and only then are you ready to lead well. And you ask questions that empower your people. And believe it or not, it builds trust and you earn respect when you humble yourself to ask questions of your subordinates and peers. And you take care of your people. You find out what they need, be it tools, policy changes, whatever it is, and deliver an early win to continue building trust and earning their respect. So I knew I'd succeeded a few months into my new job when standing a late night watch up on the bridge with a small team. And one of the watchstanders, Mike, confided in me. He said, "Ma'am, we're happy to have you on board. A lot of us don't like the crude behavior some of the guys exhibit, but we can't say anything or we'll look like sissies. Now that you're on board, we can tell them, hey, you can't say or do that because Miss Stosz is here." So I was amazed to hear that. I had no idea they were using me as an excuse because they wanted better conditions too. So I felt instantly empowered. So the next day when I walked down that passageway toward the mess deck and all the guys were hanging out there, I heard a crew member cussing. And I admonished him in a light way. I said, "Hey, Kenny, would you say that in front of your mother or your sister?" And Kenny meekly replied, "Well, no, ma'am." And I said, well, with good humor, "Well, then you can't say it in front of me or anyone else." And everyone laughed. And I wasn't trying to shame or embarrass Kenny in front of his peers, but let him know he needed to change his behavior. And it worked. And the lesson I learned there is you got to be candid, but be sure to do it with empathy. So you're not trying to put someone down. And being the only woman was the least of my worries. I couldn't be bothered with that stuff. I had to get through it. This was a tough assignment. I was the operations officer, the senior boarding officer, and I couldn't let details like that get in the way of the mission. So we were operating in the rough, stormy waters of the Pacific Northwest on month-long patrols. And I was the senior boarding officer. In those 3 years on board Clover, I led hundreds of armed boarding teams, all men, that had to scramble aboard bucking, heaving, and slippery fishing vessels of all sizes. And it wasn't unusual to be cold, wet, tired, hungry, and scared, and sometimes all at once. That's a fun place to be. And anybody who's been a veteran has probably been, well, I don't know, cold, wet, tired, hungry, and scared. Yeah, even the ground people can be that when it rains. But being the only woman kept coming back as a superpower time after time. So when we come alongside these commercial fishing vessels and inform the men, and there were always men on the fishing vessels, that we were coming aboard to inspect their vessels, check for their documentation, their fish, it broke the ice when they saw that I was a young woman. And having not seen a woman for weeks at sea, it put the fishermen off balance. So more often than not, the vessel master welcomed me aboard enthusiastically, whereas the male boarding officers were often met coldly. Threat, your man coming on board my boat and wanting to see my guns, and they were all too happy to show me their guns, their fish, everything. So it gave me an advantage of getting the job done. And I also learned it can be powerful when people underestimate you because you're different. So that became a power too. So the trials of operating in a demanding environment and discovering the power of being different made me more resilient and effective, and it confirmed that being different is truly a superpower. So the third lesson is the power of perseverance. And my story takes place in 1990 on board my fourth ship, the icebreaker Katmai Bay, just a few hundred miles north of here up in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. And I was serving as the military aide to the Secretary of Transportation, where the Coast Guard was positioned prior to 9/11. After 9/11, we went to Homeland Security. So when I received orders to command the icebreaker Katmai Bay in Sault Ste. Marie, and that made me the first ever woman to command a military vessel on the Great Lakes. And people in the Secretary's office who knew the maritime transportation industry warned me, those Great Lakes mariners will never accept a young woman and trust her with leading their ships through the ice. And others told me Sault Ste. Marie was nicknamed Sault Ste. Siberia, and that it would be bitterly cold and lonely for a young woman. I was still single at this time too. But I'd heard that challenge before many times and became very stubborn by this time and was determined to prove them wrong. Yet again, it became like a game. So in keeping with my personal core values, which I like to always go back to, I had always worked hard and persevered to achieve my goals. And facing this new challenge, I drew upon the power of perseverance. And when I reported to the Katmai Bay, Secretary of Transportation Sam Skinner, who had been my mentor as my boss and just gave me so many opportunities. And all my mentors were men, by the way, because there weren't any women in those days. He flew up to Sault Ste. Marie to attend my change of command ceremony. Well, it was big news, and okay, there's not much news in the Sault, or anything's big news, but it was unheard of for the service secretary, cabinet secretary, to attend a lowly lieutenant, 03's, change of command. And normally the secretary would only attend the change of command of the commandant of the Coast Guard, the service chief, who was equivalent to the CEO of a company. My new boss, the captain who was in charge of all the local Coast Guard units, was absolutely not happy that a young female officer was receiving all that attention. Attention I didn't ask for, keep in mind. I just wanted to be another Coast Guard member, not singled out as a female Coast Guard member. It didn't help that I was quite naive regarding the perceptions and biases held by some people, like my new boss. Just kind of had an innocent way about me, and that took me by surprise at the change of command ceremony when my boss took me aside and admonished me. You're just a secretary's fair-haired golden girl. We'll see how long you last. And I was speechless, and I thought, great, it's tough enough being the first woman, and now my boss is out to get me. What do I do? And at first it was really hard, as my boss kept me under a constant pressure. But there came a time when he backed off, and I'm like, what happened? And I didn't know until months later that one of the senior enlisted members of the crew had walked up to the captain's office and asked him to stop undermining me. And Chief Petty Officer Dave Foley told the captain it was confusing the crew and hurting morale because it seemed to them like I was doing a good job, but the ship could never do anything right in the captain's eyes. So to the captain's credit, he backed off and everything changed for the better. And when I learned about this, I was amazed that a male enlisted member, junior to me, had taken the risk to stand up and be my ally and mentor in that situation. And that taught me a life lesson that mentors don't have to be senior to you. They don't have to look like you. And they can be peers, or they can even be junior. And to this day, Chief Dave Foley is one of my best friends. In fact, I talked to him yesterday, and heading down to Florida to attend his eldest daughter's wedding on December 1st. So it's been a lifelong friendship. And commanding Cap My Bay was one of the toughest times in my career because of that boss and other reasons, but you know, you need to have an ally, and your boss should be there for you when everything else is hard enough. And up until Chief Foley intervened on my behalf, I had my resignation letter written, and I was going to quit. And it felt empowering to know that all I had to do was pull that letter off the shelf and sign it and submit it, and this will be all over. And I had my letter written twice in my career, actually, when I was younger. But I didn't sign that letter. I put it on the shelf, and I never had to go to it because I persevered. And I got through by focusing on the present, not worrying about the future or dwelling on the past. I took each day one task at a time, one meal at a time, one day at a time. And the time passed. And after about a year after Chief Foley intervened, this boss retired. And he retired because he hadn't been selected to continue in the service. And the system worked. He was moved on. And I could hardly believe it. I'd almost quit early on when all I had to do was wait it out. And what a life lesson that was. It was the power of perseverance that saw me through that dark period and enabled me to succeed when others thought, and even I thought, that I might fail. So looking back, I attribute my success in the Coast Guard to those who supported me, along with my ability to harness the power of confidence, the power of being different, and the power of perseverance. And I succeeded because I chose to find power instead of weakness in being one of the first or only women. And when I retired from the Coast Guard in 2018, I fulfilled a career goal by writing Breaking Ice and Breaking Glass, Leading in Uncharted Waters, to give back leadership lessons learned during my 40-year journey with the Coast Guard from cadet to admiral. And I wanted to do what I could to help other people find the power to perform and lead at their best on their way to achieving their full potential. I just felt this burning need to give back. And why should everyone else repeat the same problems and mistakes I had done? And as General Mattis says on his endorsement, Breaking Ice and Breaking Glass is, quote, a prime resource for any leader's library. And Secretary Mattis, General Mattis, I don't know why I slipped and called him secretary. He's been a mentor of mine too. I've been blessed to have him in my corner. I wrote the book for leaders at all ages and all levels, And many readers tell me, I wish I'd had this book when I was young and starting my career. So the book is about giving back, not just the leadership lessons, but the proceeds are all donated to the Coast Guard Academy, the Institute for Leadership, to help develop the next generation of young Coast Guard leaders of character who will hopefully relieve me one day as their time comes. And we all face challenges in work and life, and we need to be ready to meet those challenges and seize the associated opportunities. There'll be plenty of hard times, but those hard times made me a better leader by pushing me to what I thought were my limits and then beyond. And the same can be true for you and for those you mentor. I made a choice to shape my own fate, drawing upon the power of confidence, the power of being different, and the power of perseverance enabled me to be bold and reach high, to believe in myself and others, and to become a better leader. And that's the mantra I pass along to aspiring leaders of character and that I'm sharing with you tonight. Be bold, believe, and become the leader you're meant to be. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. That was inspiring and lovely. I have to say that you set the example for perseverance. That's really what has struck me about your story. And if you all have not read her book, I would say go out and get it. It's quite lovely. I was telling her today some of my favorite parts are from her childhood. And so thank you again for being here at Grand Valley and for doing this work out in the world.
Thank you. And the thing about the perseverance is when you're not gifted in other areas, you rely on perseverance. So if I had been extra smart, extra fast, extra strong, I might not have had to be persevere, but I was never, I was always very, very average. So the hard work and perseverance was the recipe.
It will get you a long way. And it reminded me a little bit when you were talking about not choosing your duty station. So I should introduce myself. My name is Jill Hinton-Wolf, and I am the director of the Military and Veterans Resource Center here at Grand Valley. So I work with our student vets, making sure that they're successful. And I'm an Army vet, and I was stationed on Kelly Air Force Base, actually, and had been out at PT one morning, and one of my friends who was clerk up at headquarters said, "Oh, awesome, you're going to Korea." And I said, "No, I'm not." And he said, "Yeah, you are." And so I went to talk to First Sergeant, and at the time I was engaged. I was the public affairs officer as an E2 for this small Army unit. I had a great life. I said, "Man, is there any way I can get out of going to Korea?" And he said, "Oh, yeah. He said, "There's two ways. You can either get pregnant or you can smoke pot." And I said, "Yeah, neither one of those are options for me." And so I went to Korea, and just to tell the end of the story, I got there, they had no slots open for my MOS when I got there. But I got there and I volunteered to be the lifeguard on post, which is not the worst duty to have when you're in Korea. So anyways, one of the things I wanted to, I have a lot of things I want to ask you about, but I'll keep it short. And so audience, if you will think of things that you want to ask Admiral Stosz. So the first thing was, I was watching and listening to you talking about Lieutenant Commander Champlin. Yes. Mm-hmm. And it sort of struck me because you read, she won the Stratton Award, is that right? And it sort of struck me because you read what her commanding officer had written about her. And it was something like, it is her extreme dedication and care for others.
Yes. Yeah.
And I sort of wondered, I wonder if there's any male that's ever won an award ever in the military for demonstrating care for others. And I just wondered what you had thought about that and if you had ever sort of run across issues like that while you were serving.
I've never been asked that question before. I have to say, I've worked with so many people. I have worked with some men who are as compassionate and caring and kind as women. But one thing I will possibly agree with you on, because sometimes what you perceive is not reality, but I don't know if a man writing an award on another man would use those words, even if that man was getting a leadership award, like we have the Witherspoon Inspirational Leadership Award. And I know every service has an Inspirational Leadership Award. Often those, if a man wins it, they are showing that compassion and caring. but they might not use those words on the man where no one hesitates to use those words when they're writing up a woman's recommendation there. And I think that's actually another one of those superpowers of being a woman, because people can use those words on us, and those are powerful words, because that's the kind of leader that people want to follow. They follow them because they want to, not because they have to, right?
Right.
So I think you're right about that, the perception that a man might write a different write-up for a man, even if that man deserves the award for having similar qualities.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things you talk about a lot in your book, and you talked about it this morning at the Veterans Day breakfast on campus, was how much reading has added to your life, being an avid reader and having lots of books. And you say this in your book too, like not only nonfiction and leadership books, but also literature has been really key and instrumental in your life in teaching you about leadership. And so I was going to ask you if you have any book recommendations for us today.
Book recommendations.
Besides your own, of course.
Oh, I'm glad you said that. I can't recommend my own book. I will say that classic literature is given short shrift, and I was in a classic book club for many, many years, and I strongly recommend the classics to anybody who wants to learn. All right, to anybody who wants to learn to be a better leader. And I especially like Russian literature because it teaches you through the characters about the nature of man. And boy, oh boy, you can see it now with what's going on with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. If you have read Russian literature, this all makes sense. So I like Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. And they're two guys who are veterans who wrote this great book on taking accountability for everything you do on the battlefield, in your personal life, in your workplace. And too often nowadays, we seem to find it easier to kind of shift the blame onto somebody else, and we're the victim. We can't be responsible for what we do. It's something else's fault. And I'm an extreme accountability, extreme ownership kind of person, and I can be intellectually honest with myself in that. And I examine myself first before I look at somebody else to blame. And I've tried, and this takes a lot of commitment to be a leader, and when something goes wrong, to take the responsibility for it, even when it surely was the result of different little things pitter-pattering around here that all culminated in a breaking point. But if you're the leader, you take the responsibility, and then you go back and you find the way to fix it and to make sure it doesn't happen again. And I think part of the blame game that you see in toxic workplaces is because people aren't accepting responsibility for their actions. So I liked that nonfiction leadership book, Extreme Ownership, by those two warriors. And classic literature, there's too many to mention. I mean, I guess I like Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky because the nature of man element of that. In my book, I talk about some of the books in there that influenced me, and some of the plays that are tragedies. The tragic hero, reading about the tragic hero in literature, so some of your Shakespeare, taught me the value of humility, which I think is the most important quality in a leader, is humility. Because if you're humble, I think you're able to be that caring leader, to relate, to take that responsibility and accountability, to not put yourself first. And the tragic hero is always somebody who's this top performer and then falls from grace because they fail to realize that they get the hubris. They lose track of their sense of grounding, their personal core values, and they stray into the ethical domain. And I know the Hauenstein Center is ethics and effectiveness are side by side. And the tragic heroes in literature fall because they lose track of their ethical compass, their moral compass, and they fall victim to hubris. And so I learned at the Coast Guard Academy taking a course on on literature, the tragic hero in literature. And so I'm glad you asked about that. You can tell I'm passionate about reading. I don't think we do enough of it as a society, and we're a soundbite society. And we need to dig deeper if we want to become deeper, better leaders and citizens.
Tell us about a time when you struggled and how that changed you.
Oh my goodness, I guess.
I mean, you talked a little bit about it, but
I struggled a lot. I feel like my life was a struggle partly because of my own shortcomings. So I got myself into things that were probably a few steps beyond what I was capable of doing, and then I was always trying to catch up to classmates who were smarter, people who were faster than me in the races I was trying to run. I tried to try out for cross country once, and I'm not a runner, and that was demoralizing because then I didn't want to quit. And so, everybody else would be already in the locker room. I'd still be coming in on the trail. But I think at the Coast Guard Academy, I struggled really hard. And I struggled because I probably was naive. I'd had a lot of hard things happen to me that made me look at life differently. And I have this in the book. And I had attended like 5 funerals in the course of a 12-month period. And they were tragic, ranging from personally tragic to just a bigger picture kind of tragedy. And I started seeing the world through different eyes. So the first person that died was my brother, Tom. He was killed when he was 17 in a vehicle accident, and I was only 20, and the story's in the book. But it was hard. I was at the Coast Guard Academy, and then more of those deaths. And those of us who've been in veterans have seen, or not even veterans, other people in other occupations or in life have seen people die, and you've had to deal with that struggle. But then at the academy, I just seemed to mature because of these real life things that were happening to me that mattered. And meanwhile, this whole these people that are training you above you just don't seem to get it. They just don't have any interest in you as a person. Reaching down to see where you are and trying to figure out what you need at the time for leadership so that you can succeed given what you're going through. It just didn't matter to them. And that was really, really hard. But what it did for me was because I felt so estranged from the environment I was in, because I couldn't understand why these people were supposed to be this great leadership institution, but were letting this young woman, me, just fall by the wayside. I said to myself, I'll never let that happen. If I survive this and graduate and get out into the Coast Guard, I will never be that kind of leader. And I would tell people that, and they would say, no, you'll become just like them when your turn comes and you get to be that way to others. And I'm like, oh no, you don't know me. I will never be that kind of leader. So I think that sometimes the hard things we struggle with can make us viscerally decide that we're not going to be like that. And I've learned far more from the bad leaders in my career than I have from the good ones, because I take for granted the good ones and just assimilate from them. But I learned so viscerally from the poor leaders what not to do. And I think that really matters and has really helped me become the person I am, the leader I am.
Wonderful. I'll turn it over to the audience at this point. There are microphones with the Hauenstein Center staff that are available. So if you just raise your hand. Does anybody have a question?
First of all, thank you, ladies, for your service. Very much appreciated. I'm a Vietnam vet, and I'm increasingly concerned about the state of our military. We see, for example, that with the possible exception of the Marine Corps, none of the branches are meeting their recruitment objectives. China now has a Navy far exceeding ours in terms of numbers of ships. With the country's inflation rate exceeding 8%, military budgets are not keeping pace. And I wondered if you had any insights from your connections on things that might make me feel better.
Oh. Well, I guess one thing is I'm now old enough. I'm 62. So I'm not really, really old, but not young either. And I've seen this before. So I've seen the cycle because I was with the Coast Guard for 40 years, and now I've been out 4. So I know that things change. Cycles always go around. That's the beauty of life. But I will say there's at least 4 things that jump to mind, and I do give this a lot of thought as to why nobody's meeting recruiting mission now. And One of them is there are just fewer young people, right? I think the United States is now reproducing at just replacement rate for children. And second, there's I don't want to have the exact data here, but there's far fewer young people who are qualified to serve. And there was a big study done by a bunch of retired admirals and generals, or sponsored by them, on readiness of America's youth. And because of all these factors like lack of education, obesity, bad health, incarceration, on and on and on, America's youth isn't ready at the same level it had been. And then you've got the fact that the propensity to serve is way down. And there's a million reasons for that we don't need to go into, but it's a fact. And then there's the economy. So whenever the economy is good, young people have choices outside the military. So those are at least 4 things, and there's probably another dozen that factor into why we're not meeting mission. And I think some of those trends, though, are disturbing. So the readiness trend and the propensity to serve are disturbing. And I think that's one reason I gave the talk I gave this morning about trying to unite and not let diversity divide us, and trying to come together as a nation. And my talk this morning talked about, people have a tendency some people to try to separate us by our demographics. So separate us by color, separate us by red Democrats and blue, wait a minute, how's it go? Red Republicans, see, I don't even know. I'm so sick of being separated by color. Red Republicans and blue Democrats. And I'm like, hey, the colors that unite us are those colors on that flag right over there, the red, white, and the blue. And we all are side by side on that flag. And we need to unite as a nation, not keep this division up, because why would someone want to serve a nation that's so divided, right? So I think that we need to find ways to elevate the health of our citizens. We're such a prosperous nation, yet we have so many health issues and education issues that aren't serving us well. So I think there's maybe the good news for anybody who's a leader, like the Governor Whitmer, and the administration and the President and Congress, is that there's plenty of problems to solve. And if we can come together, those problems are solvable. All of us here we're at a college, education, K through 12 and pre-K through 12, those are solvable issues. So I think that we need to all find a way in the audience, the challenge maybe, I like to challenge audiences, is find a way, what can you do to help solve some of these problems of making people proud again to be an American, helping people to be educated and healthy? What steps can we all take? Can we have positive attitudes, even if it's just something as small as that, as being positive about life and not being constantly negative, or bringing people together in your own little ways? And so I would offer, don't look at it as a problem too big to solve. Each individual has way more power than they think. If they can pass that power of a smile to a connection, and that person smiles and invites someone to the table and includes somebody somewhere, then you start to have a society where you get back onto that curve where you're now able to field a powerful military. And look at Ukraine. They're an example of that. So I think there's lots of hope there, and that this is a cycle, but it's going to take each one of us in this room and each of the 320 million of us in this country to make it happen.
Thank you. Admiral Stosz, thank you so much for your service. Jill, thank you so much for your service on a day that we're so proud to be here with you today. Question that I have for you. You mentioned in your comments the power of confidence, being different, and perseverance. And my question about that is, being a leader and having extreme ownership, you mentioned there were 5% of women that were in your class, I believe. You were different by nature, right? And as you were going through your career, can you give us some tips? There are a lot of young people, regardless of gender, right? Female and male alike. We may have the confidence, we may understand and be able to create those differences. I know young people today know how to create being different, but can you give a tip to those of us who are emerging leaders, some of us who are in leadership? how you did you tap into something as it related to your perseverance that helped you continue to excel and become a better leader?
So in the face of that, being in the minority for a long time, was I able to tap into that perseverance? I really, the first thing that comes to mind is something I already said, but I know you're looking for something different. But I really did get back to something as basically simple during my hardest times of just trying to get through each day. And there was times in my career where I knew I had, like at the academy, 4 years to get through. Oh my goodness, if I had looked at it as 4 full years, I would have just quit. It's too much. And I learned to break down, so maybe this is where I can give a little different answer on that. I learned to break down all the problems I had in front of me. And all of us face problems, and many of us are mentoring somebody who's going through a tough time, and they've got like 4 or 5 things that are sinking their ship. And so I helped them. I said, let's look at each of those 5. Let's take them individually and look at them separately. And then when you break things out, all of a sudden it becomes more manageable. Whether it's a 4-year thing you've got to do, like a program, or it's 2 years of an assignment where you're just dying. And amazingly, the time passes and things change. You just can't see past it. So I think that all of us who are going through hard times can tend to get tunnel visioned and we don't see the broader picture. So a mentor can help someone lift up and look at breaking the problem down into manageable chunks. And each individual chunk does not seem overwhelming, but if you allow them in your mind to all go together, they will. Or allow the whole time to look like a huge in eternity, then you're going to defeat yourself. So don't be your own worst enemy by letting it all build up. But of course, we can't help that. It's human nature. So I argue for allies and mentors, to coaches, to lean in and reach out to learn something about somebody. And I made that challenge this morning. Get to know a veteran in the audience, or in the next week or two, get to know somebody, a veteran or just somebody in your class, and learn more about them and find a way to maybe help them understand who they are. All of us are searching for who we really are, what our purpose is, and it's overwhelming to even sort through all that. There's so many choices out there. So I think breaking things down into manageable segments, whether it's one day at a time or looking at all your tasks and taking them one task at a time and not letting them overwhelm you. Because most of us can deal with the problems if we look at them that way and separate them out and look at the bigger picture, not just get focused in on the one thing that's killing us.
First of all, appreciate everything that you said, and something that kind of harped with me was the idea of perseverance. But one of the things that I kind of need clarity with is the idea that perseverance is kind of like pushing ahead, and it's like, okay, whatever obstacle I face, I'm going to overcome. But at the same time, you also have to be adaptable. But that kind of requires you to stop, slow down, and say, I'm wrong, and try to restructure your idea from there. And I'm saying, how do you switch between those different hats, between being confident enough to push ahead, but also be like, I need to slow down and stop and analyze how I can change? How do you do both?
I love that question because whenever I'm preparing a talk for an audience, I'm like, this is something that people can question because it makes it sound easy when I talk about just persevering, right? I love being in an academic environment because people challenge me on that. And I've been thinking of the same thing all my life. I thought about that because it sounds easy to say just persevere. Sometimes that's not the right answer. Sometimes a person who's on a mission trying to achieve a goal, they do need to know when pushing and going around isn't going to work. It's just the wrong choice. They need to go back and find a new path. And I guess what I would say is that I see, when I was superintendent at the Coast Guard Academy, the equivalent of president, I saw too many young people quit so easily. And all they had to do is keep at it. They're letting all this drama come down on them and just bury them and they couldn't see the bigger picture. And people can help them and counsel them and mentor them and get them through. But if it's just the wrong path and the wrong decision, then I think it's perfectly the right thing to pull back and to reevaluate, take stock, and then take off in a different direction. You just don't want to do it because it's the easier way to lose the resistance. You want to do it with deliberate thought. And this is where mentors and classmates, peers that you trust can help you to talk it over with people and ask them what they think, and don't go it alone. And sometimes you're stuck going it alone, and there's probably times when I persevered on things, not staying in the Coast Guard, but other things. There's probably times when I persevered and should have known when to quit. And I've actually had times when somebody's been pulling on my sleeve telling me to quit, and I've been too damn stubborn to listen to them. So I think it's there's a lot of good to be had and knowing yourself and challenging yourself and persevering, but there's also a lot of good to be had in giving up and being vulnerable so that somebody else can step in and say, hey, you're beating against a wall there. You really need to think about something different. So I think that vulnerability comes into that, and I talk a lot about being stubborn. Sometimes being stubborn is the wrong thing. So I really love that you challenge that so that we can have this conversation that this is not a formula that you persevere through everything. It's a way of making sure you're not quitting for the wrong reasons, which so many of us do. And we all know people who've quit and we wish they'd stuck with something. So thank you for that. And I hope I've answered the question broadly enough, but I extend the challenge to everybody is to examine your goals and where you're pushing and make sure that the choice is the right one and that the goal is still where you want to go, because our goals also change throughout our lives. And maybe you push hard in one direction and then somewhere down the line you change paths and pick a different career even. That happened to me. I picked a different focus in the Coast Guard. And I had to know when the time was right to quit going to sea and to redirect my efforts to a different part of the Coast Guard. Love it. Thanks.
Standing up again, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. I love that.
So you talked a lot about kind of what got you through your struggles and when you didn't know what to do or where to turn. But what are some tangible things that you have in your toolkit as a professional that you practice to get you through? So I'm talking like meditation, mantras, self-care, journaling, what are some concrete things that you practice to get you through tough times and just when you're just overwhelmed with too many things to do?
I love it. Okay, so it took me 2 years to write this book because I could think about all these things and condense them into it. And I haven't even talked yet about getting through hard times, that I'm a faith-based person. So it's not just been me persevering. I happen to be a Christian, and I put my faith in God. And so the verse that got me through the academy is trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not unto your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. Because I didn't know where I wanted to go to get back to this persevering thing. I didn't even know what path am I even on the right path at this academy? It's, too hard for me. And should I keep persevering or quit? And so I kind of put myself in God's hands. And I know I respect everyone who's either God or not got religion, but that's one thing I used was recognizing I couldn't do it on my own. I didn't always have another person there, but I always had God to go to talk with and have a conversation with. And then when I was captain of a ship that was stationed in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, right after 9/11, we had to get underway for 6 weeks at a time and go down to New York City and patrol off of the coast of New York, off the harbor, to be trying to inspect big ships coming in that we were concerned might have a dirty bomb or something on them, to bring another threat in by another vector They'd already hit the Twin Towers with aviation. We thought, hey, by sea, they can bring a bomb in. So we had to go board and inspect all these vessels coming in. It was really mentally challenging times. The weather was awful, and everybody was stressed after 9/11, and we were on constant recall. We never had time where the crew could go home and just sleep without worrying about the recall message coming in. So I actually, about a year into that job, things started to slow down a little bit, and I'd always wanted to go to a health spa. So I grabbed my mom and went to Canyon Ranch in the Berkshires, and I signed up for this life mapping. So it kind of gets back to that perseverance too. Are you on the right path? I took a session by somebody who does mental health on life mapping out where you want to go with your life. Because here I am, captain of the ship, and I'm very stressed. And I owed it to my people. I owed it to my people to be this really good commanding officer with a bright presence and all that. And yet inside I was very stressed because of the burden of command on me. And so I did meditation. I had taken up yoga a few years before that, and I doubled down on my yoga. And there's so much power in meditation and deep breathing. And I know it sounds corny, but I had the COVID really bad 2 years ago on Veterans Day. And I'm laying there on my sunroom floor in the morning for half an hour meditating and praying because I was really sick with the COVID. And I wasn't in the hospital or anything, but I didn't know if I would have long COVID forever. My heart was 150 beats per minute at times and everything. So I'm sorry I'm oversharing. But I want you to know that somebody standing up here looking kind of squared away has gone through the same things you guys have and had to find coping mechanisms that worked for me. So breathing helps. So scuba diving. I love the slow breathing on a scuba regulator. So anything that has to do with breathing has been really good for me. Breathing and praying and meditating.
Thank you. This will be our final question.
Hello, good evening. As is tradition, I want to first start by thanking you both for your sacrifice and thanking you as well for helping lead the way for future military members and sort of helping people like myself who came after you in service sort of find their place within the service. The one question I wanted to ask is, between the luncheon and now, I've had the opportunity to begin to sort of read through your book and sort of take into notes and things to consider for myself. One thing that I've really been looking into within your book is the aspect of mentorship. And for someone like myself who is very much in the beginning of sort of finding himself and where to go, even after military service, I was wondering if you had any advice on not just sort of the aspects of mentorship, but finding a good mentor that you can put your trust in and let mold aspects of yourself. Because in my military service, there are some who are not the best at what they do. And sometimes it can be hard to differentiate who has the proper values and who's just good at their job.
That's a really good point. So there's two kinds of mentoring that come to my mind, and there's the formal mentoring, which was never there when I was young, but now I would give the Coast Guard huge credit because we launched a formal mentoring program that's not just individuals paired with other individuals, but kind of group mentoring. And some of you have done some of these mentorings where you sit at a table and you all have the cards and answer questions and mentor. There's lots of formal mentoring programs that are fun and rewarding. I always liked the natural, organic mentoring the best. And because I was a woman and there weren't any other women, I had all my mentors were men. And I learned that it's really valuable to have people who look different from you to be your mentors. So people often are told and think that they have to find someone who looks just like them to be their mentor. And I'm like, why would you want to do that? You already are you. Why would I want to find another woman, a white woman who looks like me, who's a cutterman, in the Coast Guard? Why wouldn't I want to find somebody totally different from me to get a whole different perspective? And why would I only want one mentor? Why wouldn't I want several so that I'm getting different lines of position for those of us who are nautical, so I can get the different pieces of advice and not just one or two. And why would it have to be somebody senior? Oh, I was nearly died. I've been to a lot of these conventions where you're affinity group meetings, and I heard this African-American guy counseling a bunch of young people at his table, all African-Americans, and he said to them, all you have to do is find yourself a senior African-American person and get in the elevator with them and ride it all the way up. And I'm like, no, you don't want to find someone who's going to carry you through a career. And that's the wrong advice to give somebody. You want a rich diversity of perspectives and inputs, and you want people to help you see possibilities, to find the potential in you so that you can be the one who's going through those hard times, who's finding the opportunity in adversity, and who's making your way as a leader who's going to be worthy of leading others, not just riding somebody's coattails up in the elevator. And too many times we just think that it's all about just getting to the C-suite or getting somewhere. No, it's about developing yourself as the best leader you can be. And that comes from a richness of experiences and mentors. And I think you should find a mentor who you feel has the character that you want to emulate, not necessarily the specialty. So you can learn skills from textbooks and from the classroom and all, but people with good moral character and values, maybe they've got a lot more to teach you. So I would look for people who you admire, and I wouldn't be shy about asking somebody if they would mentor you. And a lot of people don't want to make that ask, and most people like me are very happy to mentor younger people. And there I go, presuming it's going to be a younger person. But I think just opening your mind to what a mentor or an ally looks like and trying to learn as much as you can, both formally and informally, and go to these affinity group meetings and participate in the events, but also be looking for people who you admire and respect, who you want to learn from.
And if I could just add to that, you talk about reading the book. For me, it was the same thing. I didn't have women or even people in my life when I was younger. I was very timid and terrified of making somebody upset somehow.
Right.
And so what I ended up doing was reading books. And I think I found a lot of my mentors there. Yeah.
Love it. Yeah.
But I always kind of kept open to hoping that person would come along. And I think that's a big part of it too, is just putting it out there, whether it's in your heart or more directly, and saying, this is something I need in my life and I'm open to. And between books and being out there, and I've seen you, Lee, you're out there all the time doing, helping others, and that's to your credit. So thank you. So you know this because you're in the military, but for those of you that aren't in the military, we have a tradition of giving coins. And I always tell my students when I give them a coin that whenever they look at it, that they need to remember that they were part of a team and they were part of a mission, and they will always have been part of that mission. And we so appreciate you coming here on Veterans Day and sharing your stories with us. And I hope you stay connected with us and know that you always have a home and a place here to come visit.
Thank you, Jill.
Yeah, so this is for you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much.
I'm honored. Oh, love it. It's got all the services on the back for those of you who haven't seen it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And thank you to all of you for coming out here on a Friday night to come out and celebrate veterans and take part in this discussion. And it really means a lot to the university. It means a lot personally to me, to the Hauenstein Center. So thank you, and have a great evening.
Thank you, Vice Admiral Stosz and Jill, for such an engaging conversation. To hear more from Vice Admiral Stosz, please visit the Hauenstein Center website to listen to our newest episode of our podcast, Off the Stage. Thank you for coming tonight to help us celebrate Veterans Day. Copies of Breaking Ice and Breaking Glass, Leading in Uncharted Waters, are available outside, out in the X Hall. And just a reminder that proceeds from the sale of the book are being donated to the U.S. Coast Guard Academy, James M. Loy Institute for leadership. And Vice Admiral Stosz will be available for book signing as well. Please join us here in the Charles W. Loosemore Auditorium at 7 p.m. on November 17th for our next Hauenstein Center event, Fears of a Setting Sun, featuring author Dennis Rasmussen. Thank you again. Happy Veterans Day, and enjoy the rest of your evening.